Going once? Go. Here she comes. I'd like y'all to notice we got at least 95 years of law enforcement experience right here in these last 2 men.
She's just saying we're old.
Good afternoon. My name is Patsy Lytle. I'm a retired captain, State Law Enforcement Division, Special Victims Unit. I now work with the Children's Law Center as an instructor. We're going to change the format up a little bit.
Is that working?
We're going to change the format up just a little bit. I'm going to ask 3 different questions after we have introductions so that all the questions will be asked. The panel members will comment, but we want to hear the questions that you have from the audience, and each one will answer your question. So if we could begin, could you begin the introduction, Chief Keel?
I'm Mark Keel. I'm the current chief of SLED.
Is that it?
Yeah, that's it.
I'm Robert Stewart. I'm the has-been chief of SLED. I served at SLED for over 30 years, and I served as on the executive committee of state Homeland Security advisors for the United States.
Good afternoon. My name is Neil Collins. I serve in the South Carolina House, represent District 5 easily in Pickens County.
Good afternoon. I'm Terrence Green. I'm the Chief of Police in Lexington, South Carolina. I represent the South Carolina Police Chief Association.
Freddie Pugh, Department of Juvenile Justice.
Jared Ritter, Executive Director of the South Carolina Sheriff's Association.
Kevin Wren, South Carolina Association of School Administrators, Security Roundtable Chair.
Andy Patrick, I'm here today as a former Special Agent of the United States Secret Service.
I'm Major J.J. Jones, and I'm Deputy Sheriff of the Lexington County Sheriff's Office, and you're President of the South Carolina Law Enforcement Officers Association.
Thank you. So we have 3 questions. Following topics to be discussed.
Can y'all hear that?
What is the role of law enforcement in prevention and intervention to make our schools safer? Number 2, how do we measure safety? In other words, do we have a way to assess how we are doing? And number 3, given that a lot of approved security measures were in place at Parkland, what do you think was missing? And how can we adapt to address any inadequacies?
Okay. I'll first start out. I want to start by saying this. It's unfortunate, again, that we're sitting here discussing this issue because we've had way too many discussions about it over time. When we look back, I would just say that in 1999 there was a study done by our legislature that involved mental health professionals, social workers, Department of Education, law enforcement, many others, members of the General Assembly, and there was a great study that was done, and there were many good recommendations that came from that study. In 2011, after Newtown, there was another study done by our General Assembly, 2013, I'm sorry. There was another study done by our General Assembly that I participated in along with many others, again, from those same professions. And I know the Department of Ed in 2016 did another study. And the one thing that I'd said is we studied this enough. Before me are copies of studies, and there's been many more, obviously, outside of South Carolina. And we have many good recommendations. And the one thing is you go through and look at these studies, you'll see that the same studies make the same recommendations over and over and over again. And it's time for us to start implementing some of these recommendations. Obviously, many of these recommendations cost money, but there are also many of those recommendations that would not cost us anything but some hard work. One of the studies that I refer to today is the Safe Schools Initiative, 1999, after Columbine, study by U.S. Secret Service and U.S. Department of Ed. They looked at 37 violent incidents that had happened at schools from 1974 to 2000. and the question that was asked of the first panel about the red flags. That study identified that 93% of those individuals or those perpetrators had already been identified with some type of concerning behavior prior to those incidents. 81% of those individuals had told at least one person that they were thinking about committing an act such as that. 59% had told more than one person. So, Governor, in your comments today about SROs and about training our teachers, it was one of the things that I spoke to the superintendents this morning. And that training of our education officials, our teachers, our administrators, our superintendents, our custodial folks, that needs to be mandatory training to look for those red flags, because we know what those are. And there also needs to be some reporting of those incidents where teachers and administrators feel comfortable making those reports. I've talked to teachers that have told me, you know, but Chief, I'm hesitant to make that report because I don't want to, you know, stigmatize that child. I don't want to do that, and I understand that. And whether we have a reporting where it's, you know, it's confidential or anonymous, or have somebody to report it to is something that needs to be done. I'm not going to belabor what's been said already today, but the mental health folks in our schools and John McGill has done a great job getting us to where we are today, and we need to continue that. We need the social workers in our school. Again, it does take everybody involved, but I would just say that, again, there are many recommendations that are here that this problem has been studied, and we really need to look at these recommendations and not sit here 2 years from now when another terrible incident or tragic incident has happened and talk about what we could have done. We need to work on doing it now.
You know, if we think back in time, you think, well, you look at what's on TV and this is a problem everywhere else. This has been a problem in South Carolina for years, and we need to remember that. Things can happen here that happen anywhere else. You can go back to 1988 in Greenwood. We had that terrible situation there. Blackville in 95, Horry County in 09, and in 2010. You can go on and on as recent as Townville. And like Chief Keel said, there's a lot of signs there and things you can do. And one thing you have all these signs that the Secret Service and U.S. Department of Education did that are so great, and you can look at them. And like you said, the percentages not only of people they knew had trouble with, but the percentages of people who knew something was getting ready to happen or had a strong reason to believe or suspect, not only other students, but people working in the school, teachers, administrators. And there's a whole array of issues there why they didn't do anything. They thought it was such a wild thing, somebody just didn't mean it. They thought they really wouldn't do it, they were just joking. You can't just fluff anything off anymore. You've got to take everything serious. So you have to have a good system, a threat assessment system to screen those. And one of the things that are really important you can do, every district, I'm sure you've already got them, but needs a really good school safety coordinator. This isn't something you look at once a month. This is something that you have to tend to every day, day after day. You just can't let up on it. And you need somebody in the district to really specialize and work on that. Another important thing is people that have this information won't share it unless they have confidence in someone they can share it with. So the relationships within the schools are just extremely important. Sometimes it's a very close relationship with an SRO, sometimes it's with a teacher, advisor, or counselor, but the environment within the school of communication between staff, SROs, and students is just absolutely critical so that this information will be passed on, and there needs to be an assortment of ways to do it, and they're all lined out in these studies, so that this information can be passed on. I would also suggest that I've been called on before to meet with school boards, and sometimes in executive session, and meet with school boards and go through the whole issues of school safety, that these school boards, I guess you're doing this, but they really need to know what's going on, because they're the ones going to support you and appropriate the money for what you need and all this. So it's very important to keep the school boards as well up to date and occasionally have meetings in that regard.
Well, thank you, and thank you, Governor, for convening the summit. Thank you all for attending, and to the students out there, welcome. I know y'all came in here lately, so welcome. From my perspective, I'm an attorney and a legislator, and I think instead of focusing on what's other panels with mental health and education that are both important, focusing a little bit on the security side of it, from my perspective, what I'm interested in hearing is I'm a results-oriented type of person. So, for example, we have a current bill right now about metal detectors in schools. And for me, when I think about that situation, ultimately, I may or may not be for it. But then I think about Townville, I think about Sandy Hook. I don't think it would have metal detectors would have helped in those situations. So I do think that this is a very complex issue as far as school safety, and I know we have an esteemed panel, but if there is something that arises that where I can ask results-oriented questions, that's where I'll be. But looking forward to listening to the experience that we do have. Thank you.
For us, it's all about relationships. It's all about law enforcement and that school district breaking down those barriers. In Lexington, District 1, you know, we're able to talk to the superintendent. We're able to talk to the assistant superintendent. We have the ears of the principals and assistant principals and the teachers. When something comes up, we sit down and talk about it. And when you have that relationship, those stigmas go away, because the number one priority is to teach the kids and make them safe. So building those relationships, because, you know, in law enforcement, we have our turf wars, but you got to break those turf wars down. You're going to have to be able to talk about it. I'll give you an example. Just right after Parkland happened, our superintendent, Dr. Greg Little, called me up. What do we need to do? And I always said we need to communicate. You know, he said, I'm going to talk to my principals, and the day after, I went out and talked to every principal and say, what do we need to do to make it better? So building those relationships is crucial. If you don't have the relationship with law enforcement in the school district, you're going to lose every time. You can have metal detectors, you can have anything around there, but if we don't have that trust between each other, nothing's going to work.
Before we go, I failed to introduce some special visitors. Senator Brad Hutto has his honors college class from the university. If y'all raise your hands, please. Welcome, we're glad to have you.
Good afternoon. So glad that the governor said that none of these ideas would be considered too radical, because I'm not so sure if mine's radical or not, but I've heard Chief Kill and Chief Stewart and several others kind of chime in on this, and I'm a little bit concerned that as a society, we've transitioned well in the habits of locking the doors and limiting access to the interiors of the school. And we talk about metal detectors, and and that's great, but I'm wondering, at the risk of sounding that we may be on the verge of institutionalizing our schools, but I'm wondering if it's not time to start controlling the access to the grounds. When we think about these shootings that have occurred, there's been something done to cause these young people to exit the buildings. And when they've exited the buildings, there was assailants waiting on them to attack them. And so I'm wondering if we improve upon our already in place systems. All of these children carry school IDs. And there's a magnetic strip that can be placed on the back of those IDs. And if we limit the access to the grounds, and if each young person has to scan in, you get a young person that's suspended, and that's great because maybe he or she deserved to be suspended. But how does that coach know? How does that janitor know? How do we know that that person's not supposed to be there? But if we limit the access to the grounds and we're scanning in and we're scanning out, and it's a simple red light or a green light. Red light, that kid shouldn't be here today. And so if we can control the amount of foot traffic on these campuses, or vehicular traffic, I think we may be better served. You know, by the time they make it to the interior of the school, the threat is there. You know, when we start talking about putting up fences, I know a lot of people say, well, that's going to make it look institutionalized. But there are a number of products on the market where we can kind of embrace the school theme. You know, those vinyl screens can have the school's mascot. They can have the school colors or different things to soften the aesthetics. I'm just wondering if we're not at a time where we need to control or limit the access to our school grounds. I know that sounds radical, but I think we're living in radical times.
Thank you. Again, my name is Jared Bruder. I'm the Executive Director of the South Carolina Sheriff's Association. I want to echo some of the things that have already been said by Chief Keel and Chief Stewart in regards to the comprehensive school safety plan. Again, having that conversation for school officials in concert with their local law enforcement officials is vitally important. Just about anybody could go on the internet and find a website that's going to tell them how to have a comprehensive school safety plan, but if it's not implemented with the people that are going to actually be responding to your school for that shooting, that's going to be an issue. You need to make sure that those people are identified, everybody knows what's going to happen, who's going to be doing what, and you need to do it on a more regular basis, as the superintendent said earlier today. You know, in my capacity as the executive director of this association, I represent all 46 sheriffs across the state, all 46 counties. All 46 counties do not have the same resources. All 46 counties do not have the ability to put school resource officers in every single school. I applaud the governor for putting $5 million in his executive budget this year to get those school resource officers implemented in the smaller areas, in the more rural areas that don't have the funds to do it themselves. I don't know that that's been continued on the budget trail so far this year, but hopefully, if it's not through that effort, maybe we can get some additional dollars somewhere else. If it's not through the state budget, maybe we can look at doing something on some of the limitations that have been placed on local government so that they can raise the funds to do it themselves. At the end of the day, I'm a parent. I don't have any problem paying a little bit extra money to make sure that our kids are safe at school. And I don't think the vast majority of taxpayers in the state have a problem doing that either. So that's if I could do anything today, I would just champion that idea of having those school resource officers in that school, not just in the big schools, but also in the small schools where it's going to be more difficult for everybody to respond to. And then again, as the chief also said, that communication, building those relationships, having that interaction with the people that are going to be responding, I think that's absolutely important in this process.
So I'm going to start off by saying that Chief Keel's spot on. We don't need to talk anymore. We need to do. I can respect that we are not last in per pupil funding at 24, but I'm a pretty competitive guy. I want us to be number one. Money's not everything. Stuff is not everything. There is no magic wand that we can go buy and put in a school that's going to solve this issue. It's not a school issue. It's a community issue. And it's a human issue. And until we address the mental health needs of our children, until we start putting school resource officers, trained school resource officers, vetted school resource officers that are invested into the schools, until we start clearing up some of the legal parameters that stop us, and I'm looking at my fellow people here, we're not able to have our own security departments under law. Belk's, the shopping mall, can have a security guard that works for them. We cannot. Private schools can have a security guard. We cannot. Colleges and universities can have their own public safety departments. We cannot. I have a fantastic relationship with my sheriff and chief in Rock Hill. Fantastic. Unfortunately, that is not the case across the state. And we have a school need to have trained law enforcement officers in our schools that want to be and work with children. People talk about, let's arm teachers. What do you think a school resource officer is? That's what they are. They are a teacher that so happens to be a law enforcement officer. So That's where I am.
Again, my name is Andy Patrick. I'm a former Secret Service agent, and the downside of sitting on this end of the table is that you have Chief Keel and former Chief Stewart making all the comments that you were planning to make. To avoid repeating anything that's already been said, I first want to say, Governor, thank you for your leadership. Superintendent Spearman, thank you for your leadership. And the backdrop to the comments that Chief Keel made after the Safe School Initiative, there have been training modules that have been developed on threat assessment. I think you're going to hear from Melissa Leggett in the next panel from USC. They have I don't know what it's referred to, it may be a behavioral threat assessment team at USC. They've been trained. There's been other schools throughout the state, districts throughout the state that have been trained. The training's very well received. I've conducted some of that training myself as a private citizen. It's not that expensive. It can be done. It's very well received and very effective. But what it does require is that leadership and that commitment from the governor to the superintendent of the Department of Education, right down to Dr. Ross. Your comments were very well received, right down to the superintendent of every school district in the state. And we've got to have some follow-through on that. And I think with all of that, and we can go into some specifics on those findings from the Safe School Initiative, I don't think those bear a whole lot of repeating, but the tools that were developed as a result of that, and the tools that the Secret Service has used in conducting its threat assessment investigations have been very, very effective in steering individuals off a pathway of violence. And that's what you have to understand. Each of these individuals are on that pathway, and along that pathway there are different pieces of information that can be identified, assessed, and at the end properly managed to steer them off of that pathway. And the further they get towards implementation of their plan, the more information that's out there, the people, as we looked at, you could talk about any specific incident that has occurred across this country in K-12 or higher ed or in the workplace. More and more people had some piece of information that if put together and reported properly, and a team in place to assess that information probably could have prevented that attack from happening.
Major Jones, if we could take just a few more minutes, if you could wrap it up for us, please, so we can take a few questions from the audience. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Again, my name is Major J.J. Jones with the Lexington County Sheriff's Office. To be quite simple, we need to give our kids a fighting chance in schools. We do not have SROs in every single school. If we don't have SROs in every single school, they don't have a fighting chance. Every elementary school, every middle, every primary, every high, we need to have an armed deputy sheriff that knows how to deal with a threat. Now, is that the end-all be-all to stop every single threat always? We all know that's not the case. But we got to give them a fighting chance. My son is at elementary school in Lexington County under the leadership of Sheriff Coon. We've managed to put deputies in most of our elementary schools, but we're having to split them. So my child personally has a deputy sheriff about 3 hours a day. And, you know, that's better than nothing, but I want him to have a deputy sheriff there 8 hours a day while he's there. And we can't be at every school at once, but in my simple opinion, to fix the problem, we need to put a cop on the dot. And that's the bottom line.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes, sir.
My name is Pastor Ricky Cope of Trinity Baptist Church in Lancaster, South Carolina. When the school shooting took place, I did a live broadcast from my church that went viral. We have created a plan called Aaron's Initiative. We'd like the governor to look at it. We're not here to complain, we're here to give suggestions. One of the biggest is funding. I just met with my sheriff's office. I've just met with over 200 pastors in this state. Nobody deals with this more than we do. 17 bodies are down there in Florida. There's a pastor that's buried every one of them. They'll also counsel all the officers. Thank you, every one of you, for what you do. We love our officers. We love our community. I just met with my sheriff. He was 100% behind us. We don't care as parents what this takes. I have 5 grandchildren now. I know I don't look like it, but I got 5. And my 2 are in Rock Hill School District. I love them. Governor, we need your help. There are 300 million guns on the streets. We're never going to change that. While we're talking, the next shooter is planning his attack. This initiative goes into training students' awareness I agree with you. Lock the system down. These parents want it locked down, and we don't care what it costs. We need to understand that our first priority from the President of the United States to the governor, to the pastors, to the dad, is to be the watchman on the wall. It is above education. What good is it if we're not the watchman on the wall when our children don't come home? What good is it for them to have all the best education, the best school systems, the best football fields, the best computer systems, if they don't come home? At the end of the day, we want our children home. I have proposed a budget. I'm not an economics guy. It's just an idea. But a 5-cent gas tax in America for the safety of our kids, 5 cents on the gallon. Let me show you what that'll do. For the mom who fills up her car with 20 gallons of gas, it's $1. Less than a cup of coffee. My truck holds 40 gallons of gas. It's $2. Now, I hate raising taxes. I don't even like this capital cost of taxes. Can I get a witness? But we got to do what we got to do. We need to fund these officers to do their job. We need teachers who can protect on the floor. It is first priority. We took Aaron's name. Aaron Feist was not only a teacher, but he was a coach. He was a coach and he was a security officer who was not armed. Of all the people that shooter shot at, he shot next to Aaron Feist. Had Aaron had the opportunity to fight back, we could have a different story today. But all he had was his body. All he had was his body as a shield. It is a disgrace to this country that in a nation that is most powerful in the world, that we have to worry that our children are going to come home. We don't care what it costs. We want our kids home at the end of the day. We want our sheriff's department what they need. We want them teachers trained. It's not for everybody. We understand training teachers. It's not for everybody. But I've got a $199 million budget on 2 schools in Lancaster County right now. We have the fastest growing community in this state. I do not know how Indian Land, Rock Hill, and Monroe, Union County, and Charlotte-Mecklenburg have dodged this bullet. It is a matter of time. And ladies and gentlemen, listen to what I'm about to tell you. We are going to see this again. Talk is over. We have got to lock this school down. And we don't care what it costs. We are prayerfully asking you to do what is right. And that is to be the watchman on the wall first. Then education. And then your $10 million football stadiums. But what good is the AstroTurf when we got to clean the blood of our children up off of it? Ladies and gentlemen, we are at a crisis in this country. This is a cultural problem. And we cannot change culture in a day. That's a lifetime. But we have to act today because of what we already have. And Governor, I want to thank you. I've been following you. I sent your office letters. Thank you. The President is right now resignating exactly what I've been preaching for 25 years. I've worked with young people. I've studied every school shooting that there is. And I speak to thousands of young people across this nation. I sat in my class the other night with 60 students. I said, tell me what you're going to do when the shooter comes. Every one of them said, we have no idea. What warning signs do you look for? We have no idea. That's no way to go to school. We got these officers back. These parents need results. And talk is over. We want the funding there, and there's ways to do it. Thank you for your time, Governor. We sure thank you.
We have one more question? More.
Good evening, everyone. Governor, thank you for convening this. My name is Marvin Pendarvis. I'm a member of the General Assembly from House District 113 in Charleston and Dorchester counties. And I'm optimistic and hope that we will be able to come through with this with some solutions. But to that point, and to Chief Keel's points and to several other of the panelists' points, there was a study done in '99, he mentioned. And there was a study done in 2014. And there was a study done in 2016. And out of all these studies, there have been a number of recommendations and best practices about what we can do when it comes to school safety. And so my question is one that's simple, and it's what is the impediment? What is stopping us from enacting some of these best practices? What is stopping us from doing what is necessary for our schools? If it's something with us in the General Assembly, I'm ready to act. And I encourage all of my colleagues who I see here and here, we're ready to act and do what's necessary to put this in place. But it's time to stop talking, as you said. It's time for us to stop convening. I think we've got the information that's available to us, and I'm certainly ready to review it. But it's one of those things where, I'm wondering what is stopping us from being able to implement some of these best practices and some of these recommendations that have been on the books for some time and that we've already studied. Again, as you said, Chief Gill, studying is over. It's time to act. And so I'm just wondering exactly what's stopping us or what is preventing us from acting. Thank you.
Thank you. Our time is up for this panel. I want to thank all the participants. Thank you very much. Governor, do you have any remarks you would like to make before we end this panel? All right, thank you very much.